promove edição especial virtual. Realização e promoção. Patrocínio. Apoio. Apoio institucional. Parceria. Parceiros de mídia. Assessoria de imprensa. A logística e a transformação digital integrando negócios.
Hello, welcome to yet another day of technical program of our special edition 15 Years of Expolog. A virtual greeting to our audience in Ceará, Brazil, and the rest of the world watching the International Logistics Seminar. And now in 2020, the main theme is logistics and digital transformation integrating business. Now, let's watch panel 6, called Multimodality. Here are our speakers for this panel. Beginning panel number 6, the 15th edition of Expolog, International Seminar on Logistics, a year where we have a special edition due to the pandemic. And so this is a virtual edition. Panel number 6, Multimodality. Rodrigo Vilaça, a coordinator from the Getúlio Vargas Foundation. Challenges for the development of multimodality in Brazilian logistics, Cesar Meireles. Logistics operators, and Eduardo Neves, president of ADECE, the development agency for the state of Ceará, the role of ADECE in logistics. So I'd like to welcome our speakers for today. And we pass the floor to Cesar Meireles in order to hear this talk about multimodal operators and logistics operators. Cesar, welcome, you have the floor. My dear Ricardo Parente, my dear Eduardo, it's a great pleasure to be here with all of you. And I also like to greet all those that are tuned into us, that are listening to us at this moment, and my friend Rodrigo Vilaça, who will be with us shortly. And I'd like to greet these 15 years of Expolog have always been very successful and very important for the discussions on this topic in our country. So I'd like to thank on behalf of ABOL, the Brazilian Association of Logistics Operators, on behalf of our 30 members, a sector that's been growing extensively, consolidating in the last 30 years. And this growth leaves us in a very robust position in the sector, comprised of around 75 companies. There is an annual revenue of 100 million reais a year, creating direct and indirect jobs around 1,500,000 people involved in these activities, and also taxes levied, more than 26 billion reais a year. Now, when we talk about logistics operators, and it's great that Expolog could include this difference of what multimodal logistics operators are all about. So I'd like to start by characterizing logistics operator is a corporation, a company that provides services, and so they can serve one part of logistics or the whole, a one-stop shop approach, if you will. This is the operation from the first to the last mile in all of the links of the value chain with their own assets or belonging to third parties. And it's important to mention this because there is a dialogue with multimodal transportation operators. When I say through their own assets or through third parties, logistics operators use assets in this way. But it's quite common to see logistics operators that are well activated, which means that this issue of being activated or not, having assets or not, having their own transportation vehicles, storage facilities or not, it means that all of this is quite aligned with the operational needs, with the demands, and the different contracts. The contracts, when they require their own fleets, characterization of fleets according to issues related to quality, etc. And so having your own assets or from third parties is directly linked to these issues that I've just highlighted. But logistics operators need to do at least 3 activities so that these activities take place in an integrated fashion, be it transportation in any mode of transportation, storage in any kind of taxation regime. I talk about taxation regime, I'm talking about customs or general storage. We're talking about third-party storage and freight forwarders, and of course stock management, which is very important for the characterization of logistics operators. And so, this means all of the services that are rendered by logistics operators by putting together kits, labeling, assembly and reassembly of these different kits, etc. And so this is a function that characterizes logistics operators so that we have this parallel, if you will, where we consider as multimodal transportation operators. Of course, logistics operators, besides these activities, they can work in other activities, customs clearance, airports, ports, inspection, and a wider range of services. It's important to characterize this issue so that everybody can understand third-party logistics providers. So when freight forwarders do their own logistics, and second, we have transportation companies that are quite expressive. We are triple, and fourth L are those that are consultants, etc. And so logistics operators or triple L. Anyway, I mentioned to you the whole story of 30 years of consolidation. because it's really a milestone. It was, the end of the Cold War, when the markets started to boom. The markets started talking to each other, and different volumes and sophistication of logistics was greater. And within this new universe, you also have the creation of outsourcing. And we need to remember that at that moment, with greater competitiveness, many services started to be outsourced. Also with globalization, especially at the time of downsizing and re-engineering, and logistics services that were in industry, agribusiness, etc., are now starting to take place by third parties. And these third parties start gaining this new format, if you will, logistics operators or freight forwarders. Brazil has its important milestones, the constitution that allows essential services, port services, to be operated by the private sector. Pecém is a typical case of this. And these new assets, new operations that take on these new dynamics with logistics services. So we also have the end of inflation, which brings about a new meaning to competitiveness. The dispute in terms of competitiveness worked in this sense. And so this is the new scenario. And so I already characterized logistics operator. And what does it mean, the multimodal transportation operator? A multimodal transportation operator that's part of our legislation from 1998. In 1998, this comes up in a wave, let's say, that we saw at the time of modal integrations. But my friends, Eduardo, Rodrigo, Eduardo, and others, and all those that are listening to me now, virtually, at that moment, there was a pact, let's say, an intention that once this law was passed in Brazil, as in other countries, and the tax reforms. But unfortunately, it just didn't happen. Since we didn't have tax reform, and we fought for this, and we've been fighting actually until now for tax reforms and promises of this happening in 2021, and we hope so. Tax reforms are instrumental because this will help out with goods and services tax for all states into one single tax. So the inexistence of a single tax doesn't allow to have one single invoice, for example. And so in our law, we have many records. However, we can't issue one single manifest or invoice, if you will, exactly because of this issue that I've just mentioned to you. And so if there is this hurdle, this tax and operational impediment, another operational difficulty or operational viability is the issue of insurance, because the risks are greater when you don't have a clear border, transfer of responsibilities. So anyway, this is a clear characteristic. I think this is a clear definition of what these different operators are. And so I would now like to focus on an analysis related to regulation. So there's the law for multimodal transportation operators. So we do have a law for this in Brazil. And now, I don't know if I have enough time, but I would like to go a little bit to talk about the regulatory affairs of logistics operators. Logistics operators, since they integrate logistics activities, they work or they operate by using all of the regulatory framework related to those activities that they operate in. And so if the logistics operator, for example, for road transportation, they will use the laws from the framework that have to do with road transportation. Now, if it's rail transportation, they'll follow, comply with the legislation that has to do with railroad mode of transportation, just like air transportation or cabotage or what have you. If they work in the regulated market, ports, railroads, etc., they need to follow all of the laws that have to do with this industry. Now, an important issue, a very important issue to highlight, one of the instrumental activities for our economy, and it's the main attribute of a logistics operator, is general storage. So general storage is present in all of the chains of production. All of the supply chains will require storage at one given moment in the logistics chain. So this law, my dear friends, is a law that just completed now 117 years of existence. It's a law from 1903. So those of you that are listening to us now, in the digital era, in today, where we all need to cut the red tape, remove bureaucracy, but have legal security. And with legal security, to seek investments and to develop our markets, our businesses, and to create more jobs, to create more income, and distribute more wealth within this ecosystem, which is logistics. And so we still have a law that talks about our old currency demanding the issuance of a warrant, and so you create unnecessary bureaucracy. And very difficult to do general storage, for example. And so in 2012, there was the goal to clarify this regulatory landscape, to define better, to contextualize, if you will, the taxonomy, the definition of logistics operator, and therefore bringing logistics operations where you'd have less bureaucracy, and where you'll have a better business environment that's more predictable, more predictability, and also a very in-depth study that's available. And we have a study that goes in depth into all of this, contextualizes all of this, and compares 16 countries, because the idea is not to repeat the same mistakes. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to lose time with experience that won't help us. Understanding that logistics operators are present throughout the world. So let's use good experiences, positive experiences, and that's what we did. We hired KPMG, Marcos Filho law firm, Dom Cabral Foundation, and this study is available for everyone. And we found out that logistics operators, since they don't have one single economic activity code, and they integrate different logistics activities. I mean, they manage different activities. So came up a first suggestion to create a whole new activity for logistics operators. And so it's a universal classification, and Brazil cannot create a classification within the United Nations environment, because this is for all nations, for all countries. And so we saw that we wouldn't have the possibility to create a activity code. And so we saw a necessary solution, which is a bill where we would deal with two issues. One, define what is a logistics operator, exactly what we're talking about here, and updating general storage. So there was a law decree from 1903, and in the scope of our bill, which is number 3757, 3757, July 2020. It's a bill from Hugo Leal from Rio de Janeiro, Congressman Hugo, that talks about these different topics that I'm talking about here. So my friend Ricardo, if you can log on to the website in the House of Representatives and vote favorably for our bill, understanding that it's an instrument to cut down on red tape, to remove the heavy bureaucracy where the operations will be clear, and modernization of general storage that's very useful and necessary for all. And with this, we imagine better operations and a better operational environment, a better business environment, and that will attract more investments. And of course, because of this, create new jobs, more income, and that will be wonderful. And we would like to thank all of you if you can collaborate so that our bill can gain more strength, democratic and Republican strength in our parliament, to fight for national competitiveness, for the predictability of our sector, and creating more jobs and more income for a sector that's labor intensive. And so that's what I wanted to share with you. And I'm here available to answer any questions and to try and answer your questions if you do have any. Thank you. Yes, Cesar, very clear what you shared with us. I would like just to share some comments, and I have a couple of questions after Eduardo's talk. And so this topic of multimodality, I think, is extremely important, especially this moment that we're going through in the world, and especially for Brazil. If we want to be a country with high productivity, good jobs, we need to rethink our public policies, but not alone. I think it's the moment for us to be sitting at the same table, the government, private entities, and representatives of organized civil society. So this dialogue could take place. I think in this way, we'll be able to move forward, especially during the pandemic, where you spoke very quickly about digitalization. What we were expecting for the next 10 to 15 years will be in the next few years. If you're not in it, you'll be left behind. Another situation that this pandemic has clearly shown us is a retrocess in globalization. And what do I mean by this? Well, the world feels very dependent on Asia. And I think major nations are rethinking, major industry is rethinking because our dependence on Asia and China is just too huge. And lastly, biotechnology. The pandemic has shown us that we need significant investments in biotechnology so that we can advance, move forward, especially Brazil. I'm going to pass the floor to Eduardo Neves now. And at the end of Eduardo's talk, I have a couple of final remarks. Okay, Cesar? You were very objective. And what we really need is to get together. My friend Eduardo, we're all ears. Welcome. Thank you very much, Ricardo. Well, dear Cesar, Rodrigo, those that are watching us via the internet, I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of ADECE and logistics in the state of Ceará. From 2019 until now, we've restructured our systems in the state of Ceará. It's important with this preamble so that you can understand how we are structured and how we can help. We can help out with logistics. And so we created a state secretariat for economic development, SEDETE, and we've created 5 executive secretariats. One of them is management and planning, an executive secretariat just to deal with agribusiness in the state of Ceará, an executive secretariat specifically for industry, to deal with industry, an executive secretariat for work and entrepreneurship, or labor and entrepreneurship, especially entrepreneurship, and an executive secretariat that deals with trade, services, and innovation in different areas. And others within the state secretariat, economic development and labor, 6 secretariats, Secretary Maia Júnior, which is the main secretary that deals with economic development in the state of Ceará. There are those that are linked to this. ADECE, Economic Development for Ceará, CODECE, AECIPP, which is a company that congregates the ZPE and the Port Complex, Chamber of Commerce, and which is the regulating agency. But anyway, I'm just going to talk specifically about ADECE, which is the Economic Development Agency for the state of Ceará. Now, ADECE has as its mission to come up with public policies for economic development in Ceará, providing a better business in our state. That's what we want for our state, to enhance the business environment, to have the conditions, the necessary infrastructure, if you will, to attract more business so that things will flow. So ADECE is divided in 4 boards, if you will. 1, planning and management. 1 for development. As we go through our transformation process at ADECE, where we can have resources and this is underway, but many of these structures have already been put together. From 2020, ADECE started to manage all industrial development in Ceará, where we concentrate tax breaks for companies that installed themselves here. And so the operation of this fund is done here at ADECE. We have a board that provides support for services, not only dealing with infrastructure and economic development, so with different secretariats, as well working with labor and others at the municipal, state, and federal levels. And so this is a board that's going to work by supporting investors and entrepreneurs to provide the best support that we can. Furthermore, sectorial development. 1 is for promotion, participation in events, trade shows, and business missions. And also where we have the sectorial chambers. And that's a whole other chapter, because I'd like to go more in depth now in logistics. In ADECE, we have 32 sectorial chambers. And these different chambers are comprised, if you will, where ADECE presides, Federation of Industry, Federation of Trade, FAEC representing agribusiness, Ceará 2050, and Fortaleza 2040, and SEBRAE is also part of this board, where we work with the different chains of production in the state of Ceará. And that's the work that we've been doing with logistics. And this is overarching work, because the nature of our business, it's because it's overarching. And so of all the sectorial chambers, we have automotive, wheat, foreign trade, environment, audiovisual, chemical, mining, trade and services, tourism and events, information communication technology, renewable energies, creative economy. And there's a lot in agribusiness that's quite linked to all of this. Cashew fruits, fish. Anyway, I'm not going to describe all of them because that would take too long. We have other sectors of the creative economy, as it were, in the environment, recycling, and the sectorial chamber for logistics is one of the first ones that existed here in the Northeast. And it's very important. It's important to say that all sectorial chambers, they come up with their own business plan in the beginning, and that can be renewed depending on the different entities. They come up with a business plan, and at the end, a management report in terms of what happens, what's been achieved. And something that I think is very important is when this group was able to gather all of the hurdles related to ports, bringing together the state and federal tax authorities, and started to deal with a lot of the bottlenecks that are felt. And many things came out of this. The sectorial chamber is a form of cooperative governance, if you will. Governance that's empowered the entire sector. And so we provide support, but of course we monitor, we do our part. But there are different demands, at the federal level, at the state level, even internally. When we want to do something, some specific entities that participate, for example, articulation to continue with some road construction. Sometimes it's slow. The group gathered. We went to the highway authorities. And we've been gathering and we've been discussing some changes, some improvements. And so this space and this channel of communication helps us to understand the sector better, to understand the bottlenecks, and to try and solve these problems. Of course, there are short-term problems, there are mid-term problems, and long-term problems. But we can only do this if we do it together. And so this discussion is very important and helps us to understand and evolve. Furthermore, what I could say is that the state of Ceará has been preparing itself. And of course, because we do this before, or what comes first, the chicken or the egg? You need to have infrastructure. If you don't have infrastructure, you won't attract business. But if you don't attract business, how can you invest in infrastructure? And so, anyway, the state of Ceará today has a triple hub system. The air hub and the port hub, as well as technology and logistics. The underwater fiber optic cables. For the port, we have the Pecém port and the Mucuripe port as well. Pecém is a port that has been evolving and growing constantly. The geographic location, that's extremely privileged. It's the first general cargo port in Brazil. And it's the last point as you leave Brazil. So this is very important in this whole process. And furthermore, Pecém is not only a port, it's an industrial and port complex. Furthermore, there's a whole area, 32,000 hectares, where you can install industrial areas, commercial areas, services, and furthermore, we still have a ZPE in Brazil. And the ZPE is linked to the port into this free trade area where you can do this logistics between the state of Ceará and planet Earth. Not only Brazil, but the whole world. Mucuripe for bulk cargo, but tourism as well. In terms of technology, the main underwater cables, it's 14 underwater fiber optic cables that connect Ceará to the rest of the world. And so the greatest speed and connection to any point in the world is through the state of Ceará when we talk about technology and data. And even with ports and Pecém. Anyway, I'm making all of these connections because this is all part, when we talk about logistics and technology. So the growth in e-commerce was exponential. And there's no turning back. This is never going to change. And the partnership with Rotterdam, from the Port of Rotterdam. We also have our airport, that Fraport. We were the third airport in the Northeast. Now we're the first. And there's no turning back. This is not going to stop. Everything is ready. The road is paved. And also the state of Ceará created a program called Ceará Ponta a Ponta, end-to-end, where we've invested billions on new roads so that you can have the outflow of production within the state of Ceará through our federal highways. And so with this whole infrastructure created, where you can provide the logistics with major companies that have been attracted in the last few years in the state of Ceará, anchor companies such as CSP Steel Mill that requires logistics. There is a domestic demand for this. Anyway, it's multimodal transportation at CSP. And actually, even air transportation that has a lot to do with maintenance. So anyway, a lot of transportation of raw materials, all modes of transportation are covered. And so this we see in other economic activities in the state of Ceará as well. So generally speaking, the state of Ceará is ready. We've created the instrument so that we could work with logistics. We're always open to work together so that together we can grow together and always looking towards the future with this new normal, if you will, where technology is of utmost importance, and we're preparing ourselves with our infrastructure, fiber optic cables, new companies that are investing in more integration. So I believe that that's what I wanted to share with you. I think I'm over my time now, but those are some of the opportunities created in the state of Ceará with the help of ADECE and how we can be together and work together to further develop the state of Ceará. Thank you very much. Eduardo, congratulations. Thank you so much. I'm even going to add some things that you've said because I'm not from Ceará. I'm a Cearoca, half Cearense and half Carioca from Rio. And for 22 years, I've been living here now. So I'm president of the Association of Companies belonging to the Industrial Import Complex of Pecém. A director of CIMEC, a member of ABM, and that's it for now. I've already been president of one of these chambers from ADECE. It was a great satisfaction. It was a great moment, great opportunity. So congratulations, Eduardo. I just wanted to add to the group that's here having this opportunity to talk about such an important topic, which is multimodality. Why? Why is it so important? Well, we need three basic things, right? I mean, the world, people need three basic things. First, energy, right? We need energy. Ceará today, 5-6 years ago, Ceará used to import energy. Today, we export energy. And we generate 20% of the energy in the northeast of Brazil. Yeah. We need to eat. And we need agribusiness, right? And when we talk about energy and agribusiness, we also need to talk about infrastructure. And if we talk about infrastructure, you need to talk about multimodality. I mean, logistics, where you're going to take from to where, how you deliver, globalization. It's a huge evolution with e-commerce. That's why I say that going digital, you can't go back. With the internet and everything, many people think information is quick. It's not that it's quick, it's being accelerated. Speed today is 80 kilometers, tomorrow it's 80.1, and then it's 80.2. There's no more speed, there's acceleration. And I'm not a politician, but I just wanted to say, I wanted to go on the record and to say somebody who's been experiencing this and somebody who's able to put together, a steel mill, such as the one that we have here in São Gonçalo do Amarante, 60 kilometers from Fortaleza. Ceará is a state that's really an outlier within Brazil, a point, totally far from the curve. We're an outlier because all of the government leaders in the last 30 years that I've seen and that have gone through the state, they had a state program and a government program. The government program was theirs, but the state program, that was something greater, regardless of the political party, they all continued. We had Tasso, Gereissati, Lúcio Alcântara, Cid Gomes, 2 offices, Camilo Santana now with 2 offices as well. And the state program of Ceará was maintained. This is not political discourse. Let's take a look at the indicators. Ceará's GDP, the per capita GDP, the Human Development Index, and IDEB. So I'm not talking about education, the human development level, income level, and Ceará indicators like, significant growth because all of the programs have been done. A poor state that invested in a port without having any industry there is a state that wants to make it happen. But let's go back to our topic about multimodality, okay? I would like once again to thank Cesar. And Cesar, you know, I focus a lot, the logistics operator, Brazilian multimodality to improve productivity, jobs, and competitiveness has a lot to do with public policy. And I think we need to sit down at the same table, you know. The government and companies and society as a whole, when I say civil society, all those involved, to try and sit down at the same table. Because, you know, Brazil is a continental country, is a huge country with huge states, some states wealthier than others, and so very diverse country. And to produce steel here and to send to Korea, to South Korea, you know, the same way that you have watermelons, and bananas that Ceará exports. I'm giving you these examples because this is my life here. But imagine the state of Santa Catarina, responsible for agribusiness, shrimp farming, for example. And multimodality is, you know, the whole world. Yeah, that's exactly it. So I have a question for you. What are the three main topics or themes that we need to put in our agenda every day, morning, afternoon, and night, so that we can move forward with this, with multimodality, and to improve things? It's not going to be overnight, I know, but there's a key word called planning. We need to focus on three topics, three themes, invite those that are directly and indirectly involved, and move forward. Well, first of all, thank you very much. Thank you for the question and your comments as well. Because that's a central issue. That's the central issue in logistics. And so when we talk about multimodality, now when we talk about multimodality, let me just say this, okay? It's important to say this. Ceará is an example. Congratulations, Cesar. I admire the state of Ceará. I mean, it was great when you said this, and Eduardo as well. Congratulations for your talk, because the state of Ceará has been getting it right for decades now. You know, regardless of what government is in power, there's a long-term vision with state policies, and that's how it needs to be. If we don't work in this way, we're not going to move forward. So congratulations to the both of you. Congratulations to the state of Ceará. So thank you for that. Now, regarding multimodality, I would say myself and Rodrigo Vilaça yesterday, we were part of a panel talking about multimodality in Brazil export, where we're counselors. And that was the central issue. And the first point, perhaps, is the regulatory framework. Without a regulatory framework that's simplified and clear, when I talk about regulatory framework, I'm not only referring to, for example, cabotage. Cabotage in a country like ours, 8,000 kilometers of coastline where you can navigate any time of the year. Brazil doesn't have understanding of depth or meteorologic conditions to be navigated 365 days a year. We have excellent ports, like Pecém, Suape, Itaqui, and other ports in the north, for example. We're going down to Salvador, Vitória, all the way to Rio Grande do Sul. This is very important. When we talk about multimodality, and that's why I'm talking about a regulatory framework, because a regulatory framework needs to have meaning. And it can't be seen in a fragmented way. I usually say, Ricardo, Eduardo, and Rodrigo, and those of you that are listening to us online, integrated logistics is of utmost importance. And this needs to be taken seriously at all levels. Regulatory frameworks need to dialogue amongst each other. You remember, if you come up with a regulatory framework for cabotage, disconnected from road transportation, from rail transportation in other areas, how can you develop? We really need to follow the example of Ceará and have long-term policies, state policies. BR do Mar, that's very important, or cabotage, is so important, but we have at the same time two bills in Congress, BR do Mar from the federal government, and also another bill from Cachabril. So I'm only saying that if we want things to move forward, we cannot have two identical documents. Well, they're not identical, but dealing with the same topic, trying to be voted in Congress. And so this regulatory issue, Ricardo, I think is of utmost importance. But, you need to have integration. You need to have dialogue. The different regulatory frameworks need to talk to each other. When we talk about multimodality, we have cabotage, and we have the railroad framework. And so if we develop quickly rail, such as north-south, ferrogrão, etc., you're creating actually two parallel axes for development, okay? And then you transfer to different regions, north and northeast, the possibility to have greater development. So we have the capacity to invest and to create tax breaks in the north and northeast. Because of industrial factors. And so through these different types of logistics, you have now the possibility of transferring development to other regions, connecting with the region that has the greatest consumption, which is the south-southeast, regions with a greater consumption. But how am I going to deal with regulatory issues? I need to do this in an integrated way. You need to understand that just as important as the framework, you need to take care of the central issues, like in rail transportation. And it's important for us to have integration, to establish multimodality. And the East and west axes. And so we have a concentration of our population along the coast. But you can establish in this integration, Transnordestina, for example, and then you transfer all of this amongst the regions, creating multimodality. Another regulatory issue. I mean, how is it possible, ladies and gentlemen, that are listening to us now, to produce a Jeep in Pernambuco and take this to Rio Grande do Sul by truck? How can you produce Ford in Bahia and transfer to the north of the country by truck, by road? I mean, how can we do that? It doesn't make sense. But of course, we need to understand, we need to better understand our regulatory framework. That cabotage integrates road transportation, because road transportation and this distribution also has to do with ports. You know, taking vehicles to Pecém, and from Pecém you distribute, or to Suape, or to Salvador, or to Itaqui for that matter, or vice versa. Now, a second point that is extremely important is to have a strategic vision, if you will. Eduardo mentioned some important hubs in Ceará, and I would mention here that what's also important, the clusters, the logistics clusters, be part of planning. When I talk about a logistics cluster or a hub, I'm also referring to logistics platforms. An example, okay? Zárate in Spain. Zárate in Spain is a city in the countryside that integrated not only the ports in Spain, but the rest of the country and other European countries. And there they conceived a hub, if you will, a logistics hub that's extremely important. And you take ownership of this idleness by using the different modes of transportation, coming and going, with different types of cargo. What's curious, for example, is that Zara that's there, actually Zara and the region have nothing to do with each other, or Zaragoza, because they used vehicles that were idle. And that has to do with, fishing. And it's really interesting what they've done in terms of multimodal logistics, establishing a better logistics distribution. As we redesign globalization to dependent on Asia, for example, but now a new design of globalization and the transfer of production closer to consumers. And e-commerce, this redesigning of globalization favors, enhances logistics. This whole movement that we're talking about will require more logistics. And so for the third point, and very well mentioned by Ricardo, it's linked to the first one, actually, the issue of infrastructure. I mean, infrastructure depends on regulatory framework. This connectivity, and to help with all of this integration. And I would mention a fourth one that I think is important. logistics operators in this context. Let's say at ABOL we have 30 members. We have small size companies and larger companies like DHL, UPS, FedEx, etc. But they're smaller companies, okay? So the capital relationship for service providers is very important. In a country like ours, where access to capital is not always possible or easy, I would say that it's important to have, and I've said this a couple of times, we need to look differently towards service providers. I'm not referring to the construction of assets, like the construction of a railroad or roads or ports or airports. For this, we have some really interesting projects. Now, looking at service providers, logistics service providers, to obtain cheap financing, competitive financing, I think that's better. Cheap doesn't always sound good, but competitive financing so that this whole chain could be well developed. And a fifth one, Ricardo, less red tape, less bureaucracy. I think this is extremely important. In a very bureaucratic country such as Brazil, cabotage in Brazil today, you have to issue the same amount of documents. In road transportation, there's a electronic manifest and so many other things. You have to have the electronic invoices need to be printed. I'm just mentioning a couple of examples, but it's very difficult. So you asked me for 3, and I'm talking about 5 here. Yes, Cesar, excellent. Very, very interesting. Talking about cabotage and rail transport and road transport, air transport, I think the 3 became 5, like you said, but I'm going to leave you with some homework, and after we can talk more about this, but I think there's the need to have some strong engineering there to circulate things better in our country, regardless of the regulatory framework. And so, like you said, logistics operators, you need support, you need credit, but we need better circulation at a local level, at a national level, and at an international level as well. There must be some engineering firms in Brazil and the world that could do this kind of simulation. What does it have to take and what can we receive? And after cross this information, the 26 states in Brazil and the federal district, something's going to come out of this. I don't know what exactly, but what you're saying really is extremely necessary and very positive. This is a matrix. And Brazil hasn't done this, Let's talk to private companies and government. Let's do this together. Planning, facts and data to say, I need a regulatory framework because that's how things will happen. If we just wait for a regulatory framework from our national Congress, and there may be a conflict. I think we need engineering in order to have facts and data and to say origin and destination. We need this, this, and that. Look at the facts. Look at the simulations. I'm saying this because we did a simulation for transportation from the steel mill to the port. just to have an idea, the engineering company came up with 78 simulations. Of the 78 simulations, 4 were the best ones. Just in time, etc. But of course, details, right? Yeah, that's correct. Since you have a lot of logistics and multimodality is feasible and very useful, so you have these same systems that you're talking about to synchronize the different modes of transportation. And so what you're saying is correct, necessary, and we need it now. Thank you. Yeah, and just to collaborate with Cesar and with all of you, e-commerce, the digital world is this. It's speed. It's transit time. So time is money, right? So the greatest challenge in logistics is time. Without connection between these things, Brazil is just not going to make it. So, people want things delivered in like less than 30 minutes. Yeah, thank you very much, Cesar Meireles from ABOL. It's excellent. It was my pleasure. Many challenges. I see that this area has so many challenges and so many opportunities as well. Yeah. Thank you, my friend. Thank you so much for the invitation, for sharing with Eduardo and Rodrigo. And we're always available. I'm always available. And, I think we need to say something. We need to thank the Ministry of Infrastructure, Minister Tarcísio and his team, because they've been doing some excellent, excellent work. Looking at the country as a whole, you know what I'm saying? They're very competent. And so I think, we need to acknowledge what the government has been doing. Excellent initiative. Congratulations, Expolog, 15 years of existence. Yeah, I echo exactly what you've said. I'm not a specialist in this area, but I agree with everything that you've just said. We bring different types of stones, sandstone and soapstone. And so this work has been so important, and focusing a lot on planning. Planning. Now, Eduardo, a question for you, Eduardo. I don't know. You want the best question or the worst question? Wow, that's difficult. No, I'm just joking. Yeah, Ricardo, I'm in Brasilia and I have to grab a flight now. I have to catch a flight. So I'm going to have to leave, okay? Thank you very much for everything. And once again, thank you so much, and I'm fully available for anything that you may need. Yeah, it'll be a great pleasure to receive you here. We're going to have some lobster together. Ah, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Eduardo, actually, it's difficult now to ask you anything because you were very clear. You really mentioned everything. ADECE has a purpose, and the purpose is very clear, planning and management, support for operations and services. So congratulations for your leadership at ADECE in 2019. 2009, actually, you went through some restructuring. So I had the opportunity of seeing all of this in Ceará. I just want to highlight we need people. And I see that ADECE has a wonderful team. So anyway, I really don't have any further questions for you. I just wanted to ask you this. ADECE is 100% available in receiving private companies, civil society to discuss these different topics, these different things. Yeah, of course, our clients. From our point of view, these are our clients. We always accept criticism, feedback. What we want is to find solutions. That's why we're here, to find the best solutions for the state of Ceará. We have, a plan until 2050. You participated in this process. You know this very well. In order to meet these objectives and start paving the way, and this way is not easy. There's some obstacles and hurdles along the way. So yes, a partnership with companies, private companies, with government agencies, civil society, and, to show what's possible and what's not possible. That's our role, Ricardo. So we're always at your disposal. Yeah, I know. I just wanted to reinforce this message because it's important, right? I mean, sometimes companies say, I'm not going to talk to the government. They don't do anything. They're incompetent. But that's just not true. And so to finish, I think that we need to sit down at the same table, private companies, government, civil society, regardless of the problem. We need to sit down at the same table and we need to talk about it. That's the only way we're going to find a way out. If it's right or wrong, we don't know. But I want you not only to highlight ADECE, but SEDET as well, Economic Development Agency, a secretariat that's always been open, now talking about innovation clusters. We from the association were participating. And so to finish, thank you very much, Eduardo. I'd like to thank Expolog, Prática Eventos, and Enigi Câmara. It's really a 100% online. Congratulations. Excellent content. And I'm going to ask Rodrigo Vilaça, the coordinator from Getúlio Vargas Foundation, and after his final remarks. So thank you very much, everyone. Hello. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you here at Expolog. I would like to thank the organizers for this opportunity to talk about the practice of multimodality. Of course, because of high throughput, the use of different modes of transportation. And this is extremely important for a country like Brazil, a continental country like Brazil, and so many Brazils within one country. And so we really need to relook at transportation and multimodality. The infrastructure, the means of transportation, technology, and systems, all of this is within, also tax and legal frameworks. And finally, meeting the needs of the clients that actually use the system, depending on how they want to transport their products, not only in a safe manner, but in an economic manner as well, and satisfactory. I always use in my life and my profession the idea of meeting the needs of clients, even going beyond the customer's expectations. And so the supply chain allows for us logistics professionals to work with more care, with more accuracy, with greater observation to the different links of this chain. So the first point that I want to call your attention to, everyone who's watching us, is that we need to disarm ourselves. In fact, transportation industry, packaging and technology and people need to understand that users or clients, freight forwarders or governments, we're all part of a chain. And this chain, the more it's developed, the better the results will be positive results, and will be optimized, and will be reliable, and will bring about satisfactory results to all those involved, all stakeholders. It's an art to know how to sum different parts into a whole so that this ensemble of operations, if you will, be successful. So Brazil, that's so huge, the Amazon rainforest, the northeast of Brazil, a significant coastline, and many difficulties with our infrastructure, differences in taxation, and the Midwest is dominated by agribusiness, which are very sensitive crops in terms of transportation in order not to lose out on competitiveness. The southeast of Brazil, very rich, very powerful, totally industrialized, and that has some excess, very high demand. And the south of Brazil, another border, a dry border that also has industrialization and a very important industry, like Santa Catarina, for example, with many different ports, a port like Paranaguá, where the characteristics of cargo throughput, agribusiness cargo, industrial cargo, are really quite different. And each one has their own characteristics. Each one has their own needs when implement multimodality. So the word really, the key word that I would like to share with you today is that we really have to practice multimodality in Brazil, but by disarming ourselves. In other words, putting ourselves in a position where this exercise be satisfactory for all parties involved, all stakeholders involved. In showing greater efficiency, if we can show this in a competitive manner to the rest of the world, it's because Brazil has advanced in the last few years. We have a major difference here. We have a clear path now in terms of transportation infrastructure. And when we add to trade, to agribusiness, mobility, overnight delivery, densities of major cities, what we're going to do post-pandemic, we are quite powerful when you think about it, to practice, to build, starting this decade, 2020, and now 2021, to build a different Brazil, and not only be seen as Brazil is good inside the country, but outside, not so much. We have great potential. Different examples of waterways and railways, the waterways in the south and the Midwest and the north of Brazil as well, and the recovery of our roads, our highways, concession to the private sector, bring together private companies and the government to give a new concept in terms of what we can practice as a state, as a federal government, a program with continuous improvement in Brazilian infrastructure. And multimodality is key in all of this because it's going to show for those that are coming, what we're receiving, and also what we export, to have a more positive outlook, economically sustainable, that will allow for better results. Now, another fact that concerns us in this industry is the issue of regulation. How to regulate all of this, even environmentally speaking. We have to give a new meaning to bureaucracy, because this is a word that still concerns a lot of people. The fact that we always have so many standards, so many laws, so many rules, and we're not optimizing. I really like to use an expression. Secretary Marcelo Sampaio, Executive Secretary, from Infrastructure, used this, and I expand this a little bit. The impression we have, it's as if we were, sorry about that. It's like group therapy. But let's imagine this, the different efforts that we're making, all of the strength, any movement that we do will generate a sort of movement. The force applied produces a movement. If we don't know how to measure, how to check this effort, this displacement, if you will, this force that's applied and the change that comes from this, we could have this understanding crisis where we applied a lot of force beyond what was desired, or a lower force was applied than what we wanted to. Professionals in logistics need to deliver something within a deadline. If you delay, that's going to get in the way of the entire chain. So if we're able to maintain a good measurement of what we're doing now, of our actions, the efforts, the force being applied, the power, definitely we will observe things better. Observing is very important. And all of this will be applied as the data, as the statistics, as the predictability of that system be well understood. And so I see in this context a huge importance, so that in this measurement, we can have a real idea of the size of all of this, so that we can approach this. And of course, it's group therapy. The feeling is that we went through this, but we still have a long way to go. So at the end, I don't want to participate in group therapy. I want now to participate in productive meetings with statistics, with data, with technology, AI, with information, and that the private part and the public part of this can, with common sense and dialogue, and I think this is another word that's a key word, where we've heard from many at the Ministry of Infrastructure and the Ministry of Transportation as well, to practice dialogue, to use dialogue. So multimodality requires integration, and this integration also includes dialogue, with the political side of it, the business side, together with civil society. And of course, always with enforcement and monitoring our key performance indicators and targets in terms of what's proposed, as we transfer some of these responsibilities to the private sector. Because some governments, some states cannot manage infrastructure that's so important. And so we need to show what's going to the private sector, what will be regulated, what will be maintained, what are the expectations we have, that in this decade, we're going to advance a lot in terms of airports, road improvements, significant developments in port terminals, cabotage, railways, and also a waterway plan. And as I've mentioned, Brazilian railways. We need FIO. We need to add to the north-south railway, different highways, and a social role. Also, the transportation of passengers between municipalities, between cities. So there is a perspective, there's an outlook of urban mobility that's very important post-pandemic, adjustments and improvements. What would be the best project or design for each city? Perhaps the use of BRT or VLT, light rail. So really, multimodality, transportation, storage, technology, and people with significant breakthroughs. Now, we'll only be able to overcome these barriers, business barriers and public hurdles as well, because we also have bureaucrats that perhaps don't even know what a cotton plantation looks like or rice crops. We need people to understand what horses are, what it means to load a ship or a 300 wagon train that transports soybeans to the port. We need to improve this rural environment in a more transparent manner. And I see this happening as the ministry, the Ministry of Transportation needs to work together with the Secretariat of Aviation, Secretariat of Ports, Secretariat of Land Transportation, working in the same environment and not in silos. There is a concern so that these new departments can work together as a group, as a technical group that's been established to provide this regulatory security, and the executive branch of government as well. And, you know, there's always this issue if you centralize more or you decentralize. And so in logistics, we deal with this as well. And another issue comes in multimodality, which is an environment for freight forwarders, logistics operators, storage and warehouses, silos, or natural gas. There is need for structure. We need to have storage improvements close to major cities. And depending on each product, trade, industry, agribusiness, and associated to this, of course, are the systems, this new generation of technology in order to minimize the effects of a delayed delivery. So it's within this environment that we need to be concerned to know how to store products well, bulk, grains in pallets. Anyway, the way it needs to be. That is our responsibility. Because it is our responsibility. It's one of the items that makes the supply chain function. And that's what's behind multimodality. You know, from a tanker ship to function well within the throughput of cargo, always with cargo security, data intelligence, and of course, we are the managers, the people that do this in all different skills, from the most simple one, the most efficient, from a monitoring standpoint, using data, artificial intelligence, or also to know how to transform products and our cargo. So anyway, overcoming challenges. I think that's the word of the day, really. And that's the way that we'll be able to advance in the next 10 years. And I can say this with 55 years of age, that this difference will be positive, will be visible, because the breakthroughs that we've had in the last 30 years, they reached a point where it's inevitable now. It's impossible for us to continue in this current status, in business as usual. We'll have small differences between the transportation system, but yes, we will improve a lot our practice of multimodality. I understand the dialogue, especially dialogue with the regulating agency, a very unified team at the Ministry of Infrastructure the potentials of agribusiness, the strength of our industry, and also the power of our trade. And we cannot forget that we have the National Transportation Committee that has all the statistics, all of this data, and helps us in our decision making. And of course, academia, certain universities, the Center for Studies in Urban Mobility and Transportation at the Getúlio Vargas Foundation, and for sure, Ricardo, and my dear friends that are hearing me now, this makes a world of difference. So the academic world, together with the business community, with statistics, with information technology, data, enforcement, regulation, and resources injected, we're going to advance a lot. In my career, in my business vision, I love working with teams, building teams, and developing projects, be it in construction, petrochemical, transportation itself, electric energy, and agribusiness as well. I have no doubts in my mind that one of the economic pillars, financial pillars, when this is well established for projects, information technology, this is relentless in our relentless search for data, big data, so that people can come up with great results, training people, giving them knowledge, providing them with technology, and applying resources in an intelligent manner, in a coherent manner, the right way. This unity, this strength, bringing together people and systems and hardware and technology and software, we're definitely going to advance a lot. And I understand that multimodality will be a lot more sustainable and intelligent. That's the way I think, and that's what I wish for our future. Thank you so much. Well, Rodrigo, what changed in the role of the Ministry of Infrastructure since 2019? So the role of the Ministry of Infrastructure in our country started to be relevant together with the Secretariat of PPI in alignment with the state governments in taking this policy for concessions or the work from the ministry to know which way we're actually going. So the centralization that's going on, this determination that the different agencies, like a regulation agency, the Ministry of Transportation, all working in alignment, in harmony, created something without precedent so that private agents, companies could, within their organizations, within their business plans, align and understand what is the right way to go. And the identification of projects becomes easier. And so the ministry has organized and structured and has transformed the infrastructure and transportation industries into something way better. It's quite meaningful, the centralization of the ministry, and consequently, the results will be very significant in this new decade, for sure. What is your assessment of concessions and privatizations forecasted until 2025? Well, it's exactly this organization, the Ministry of Infrastructure, made it possible for states and municipalities could organize themselves in modeling their states and cities, considering the Brazil, our country, the Brazilian state is going to provide in terms of opportunities, and international investors and national investors, and even a combination between the two, to improvements in concessions and privatizations. And so we're going to have the Presidente Dutra Highway in a tender, in a bid, and also the Viracopos Airport, the railways from the Midwest, also Ferrogrão, parallel to the federal highway that will undergo a concession. And we could have FIO in Bahia and different state concession programs for urban mobility, like the state of São Paulo with the new metro line in São Paulo, Also improvements in the airport Guarulhos. It's a private project. And so different things that the government is doing with different states and municipalities, such as Guarulhos International Airport, and breakthroughs in port terminals, different ports along the Brazilian coast, all the way Rio Grande do Sul, all the way to Manaus, going through Santarém, Amapá, Port of Pecém, Port of Suape, Cabedelo. The entire Brazilian coast has been undergoing major transformations and rearrangements, reorganization, even the concession of the Port Authority. And so this new model, this clear way of the current government can help us imagine that in this decade, during this next decade, we're going to have major things happen, regardless of the financial amount. But the transformation of these concessions and practical results for users, we're going to advance a lot for sure. What are the impacts of the pandemic on different modes of transportation, and what can we expect going back? Well, the pandemic, we've all had to adapt. It's really very difficult, very delicate. We've been feeling the impacts, different ways of operating the system. You know, from a simple plane trip, the procedures, and also a bus trip with passengers, and containers and cargo. Anyway, all movements of the supply chain and multimodal transportation, of course, are going to have new points of observation, so that the safety and security of the cargo and the elimination of possible viral interferences can be checked, enforced, controlled, verified in a port environment or airport environment or railroad environment, metro, in a bus, in a taxi or Uber. All of us are acting differently. And this doesn't scare us. It really is a new normal, as it were. A new normal of taking greater care, greater attention, more observation. And I'm sure we all have very common sense in order not to exaggerate. But the impacts for each one will be significant, will be meaningful, and different, depending on the type of transportation, the type of product, the type of cargo. Special care that perhaps in the past we weren't so careful with. Logistics operations will be different in the next few years to come. Well, logistics operations, I'm a professional from this industry, and I can say it'll be totally impacted. It will be totally different, exponentially improved. And we will see all of this from a simple purchase online or others that are not possible, like sending 30,000 heads of cattle by ship to another country. We're going to have transportation of cotton seeds in containers, the Homo terminal, going to Santos, and from Santos going to South Korea, for example. Of course, airplane travel, air transportation from Manaus, also to use cabotage along the Brazilian coast in a sustainable manner with the help of the Ministry of Infrastructure, improvements in regional aviation, improvements and breakthroughs in highways and roads. And these operations are within this concept of multimodality, a broader sense of the concept. Freight forwarders, transportation companies, the government, the coming and going of cargo and people will be more transparent, will be seen by society as a major difference, something that sets us apart. The most perfect logistics in Brazil until today that I know is during Easter. You can see in these last few years, we've never had problems with Easter egg deliveries because it's very well modeled and planned and executed. And so this will become more and more visible. And it will be the future, together with technology, greater knowledge, for logistics. Dialogue is a key word for our industry. What else do we have to do in order to move forward? I would say that, as a final remark, I'm optimistic, but I understand that we need greater integration between stakeholders. We have to disarm ourselves, disarm their vanity or ego. All the logistics, the entire supply chain, all operations can become more efficient, more safe and secure, more productive, more correct, more economically sustainable. And all of us, definitely, in a port environment, in a road environment, rail environment, cargo, people, government, private sector, agents, the Justice Department, regulatory framework, we're all going to grow a lot. I'm very optimistic. I believe in Brazil. I believe in the potential of our industry and services, in people. I believe in Brazilians, and that we can move forward, and making it very clear that logistics will make a huge difference, as long as we all know to use common sense and ethics and justice, so that we can take this country to a new level where we deserve to be. And we've lost during a long time. We've been losing out during a long time now, the potentials of our continent. But we've advanced a lot in many fronts, and now it's the time. The time has come for dialogue, for common sense, to do things well. And that's the way that I think. And these are my expectations for this next decade. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.